Welcome back, everybody. It is John Pollock, and you have grown to love these quarterly chats. It is a pleasure to welcome the newest member of the post-wrestling family, launching Wrestlenomics Radio here on the site on this Sunday night, but we have plenty to discuss today coming out of the WWE's third quarter earnings report. And I think a discussion that, to quote Nick Khan, is going to be intense and fun. I'm welcoming Brandon Thurston here to the show. Brandon, how are you?
I'm good, John. Thanks for having me. It's I had the earnings call to cover yesterday, and I was trying to do a live stream yesterday evening, and just Twitter was on fire with all the people who were being released at the exact same time that I was doing that. So I figured I was done at that point. It was a long, intense day, and then I woke up this morning, and I found out no, it's not over yet. It's not over. Kristina Salen is out as a CFO.
You were actually the one that alerted me to the Kristina Salen news that I had not been aware of until you had messaged me. So, I mean, I go back to the craziest day that coincided with an earnings call of recent memory was going back a couple years when the earnings call landed on the same day as the Saudi Arabia card, when they were doing them Thursday mornings, and they were pretty much back to back.
Halloween 2018, I think.
That's it. Yes, 2018. This one trumped that one for sure. Well, people will give us some leeway there. The comments are always very on top of everything. But this one certainly trumped all of that. Just in terms of the optics of all this, Brandon, I mean, do you believe that is even a consideration when it comes to, a day when you're making this big announcement coinciding with the latest in a series of mass cuts? Because, it's obviously not a mistake that both of these events occurred within hours of each other. But I definitely venture to question whether that's really of any concern to them in the grand scheme of things, of how close in proximity these announcements came.
Yeah, I did think about that because I heard you and Wei talking about that in the news update today, which I just listened to.
Look at that on top of
things. Yes. Product placement. And I think there's the issue probably is that they didn't want to announce the cuts before the earnings call or shortly before the earnings call. I imagine that was the edict for some reason. I don't know if they wouldn't want questions about that. I don't know that this stock analyst audience really would even question that, though. If anything, in an investor point of view, this is cutting costs, and as long as you're not cutting Roman Reigns, I don't think anybody's going to bat an eye. So I don't know. There must have been some reason why they didn't want to do it before the earnings call, and I bet that once the earnings call was over with, John Laurinaitis or whoever was told, yeah, you can go ahead and do it. But it's got to be after 6:00 on Thursday or whatever.
To me, it's never really shined a light more so on just the complete separation of the company's end of things and the talent that are, the worker bees that you come across. Like if you are someone just covering this business, feel very replaceable outside of maybe a few key stars. And it's just a very stark contrast. And this comes at a time when I think the company more than ever are leaning on these personalities, these superstars that are brands to them, that they are finding a way to license and make money off of. But in the grand scheme of things, very much replaceable.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Nick Khan, not only is he, as I've been thinking and writing and telling people today, the man who holds the keys to the media rights negotiations, which are so important to this company, but there's all these other little deals that we see press releases for, like it's the NFTs or Cameo, all these little ways to monetize their wholly owned intellectual property. But at the same time, this is a company who's collected a lot of wrestlers over the last few years. They'll never say it publicly, but I think it's because they wanted to hold this talent away from other competitors, including AEW. They went from having, I think, somewhere around 150 talent under contract. They disclose this number too every year in their annual report, so we do get an annual update. They had somewhere around 150, maybe 180, I think, in 2015, and then by 2019, or maybe it's the most recent year annual report, they had around 300. So they basically doubled the number of talent that they had under contract over the last several years. I think that was to compete with others who they didn't want to allow to have an opportunity to become players in the wrestling business. So there's that phenomenon happened. And now they're deciding, this vision, this brand that Triple H built and all these people that he signed, we're rejecting that. And we're not doing talent that way anymore. We don't want to. And I think part of it is, this is just my read on the situation, especially when you see them release people like Keith Lee. I think they're saying, if AEW wants these wrestlers or somebody else wants these wrestlers, we're not going to compete for them. We're not going to, get into a bidding war over talent and run up our costs. We're going to grow our talent from the ground up and pull them out of whatever athletic field and train them in our facility. And we're going to double down on this idea that we don't need people with a wrestling background before they came to us. So there's that happening too. It's a lot of talent that they collected and didn't need in the first place in those numbers anyway. And it's a change in the vision of the kind of talent that they want.
Yeah, I think it's really hard for even the most optimistic viewer to look at this, that all of these moves, it has just been such a wholesale denouncement of the Paul Levesque model that had been crafted, that had been built up, that found a lot of success as a touring brand that could go to the Barclays Center, for instance, and sell out a takeover. That is not the NXT of today. And it has just been from the key players that he recruited to the entire philosophy. Like it's a 180 over the past year. Yeah.
And so they disclosed, and they put out a press release when this happened, that Paul Levesque had a cardiac event in early September. It's now been more than a month. We're now in early November. So I guess it's about 2 months since that was announced and disclosed. I can't imagine what Paul Levesque is going to do when he comes back to this company. What kind of role is he going to have? I can't imagine him having a similar role that he had in NXT when he comes back to this rainbow colored NXT with all the different talent. They've totally revamped it since September.
Nor was that even brought up on the call. And maybe that's not necessarily to be expected, but Paul Levesque is often in the background on these calls. He's not always called upon, but that was interesting. Like one of your executives that had a publicly disclosed, significant health issue was not mentioned. I was curious if that would even be addressed off the top, and maybe they felt that was not the place for it.
So in the Q&A, Brandon Ross of Lightshed did ask about NXT. Yes. Nick Khan did mention the name Paul Levesque in tandem with Bruce Pritchard, as far as the people who are, recruiting talent or in charge of talent development. So his name got mentioned, but the question was along the lines of how are you satisfied with the way that NXT, the new NXT 2.0 is coming along? And they said, of course they are. I can't imagine that's a very honest answer, though. This is a brand that's supposed to appeal to younger audiences, supposed to appeal to the 18 to 34 crowd. It's got the oldest median age in all of wrestling. But it's holding its viewership okay. So it's not doing terribly, but it doesn't appear to be achieving the goals that they have said that they are trying to achieve with it. I was talking to someone earlier today. I just don't know how Paul Levesque is going to come back and do what is he going to do in this company? It seems like the game that he's been playing since 1995, everything that his career has been building towards, which we all thought, years ago, was to succeed Vince in the creative role. And that's very much in question now. I don't know what he's going to do in this company.
Just going over some of the major notes from the actual earnings report, they reported revenue for the quarter of $255,853,000. That translates to a net income of just shy of $43.5 million. Brandon, you had gone through your own evaluation heading into the quarter. So how did the numbers compare to what your expectations were heading into Thursday?
I have a chart for that. We will describe it, though, for people listening on the podcast only. So all of the analysts I don't see everybody's analyst report, but I see these sort of condensed, aggregated reports that say, here's what the high was, here's what the low was, here's what the average was. And the average was 34 cents earnings per share. So that's net income per share. And there's like 80 some odd million shares. 34 cents was what the analysts were expecting. They beat on that. I think it was 53 cents per share is what it ended up being. I thought it was going to be 56. So I was higher than any analyst. So the team here at Wrestlenomics headquarters, we came together and we ran our various math formulas through the math machine. And we were able to
I think they had it earnings per share listed at 57 cents, but diluted shares 52 cents.
Right. So I'm talking about diluted. Yeah. So 52. So I was a little bit high, but much closer than the like 11 analysts who put out reports on it. So they beat on earnings. The stock price is down today. Of course, maybe that has something to do with the news of Kristina Salen being out of the company. I don't know though. What happens a lot, I would have to go through the stock history and pick out the dates of the earnings, reports. But I think what happens a lot of times is that on earnings, people sell on results. You speculate, and then you sell on what the results are. And I think what's happened here is, especially when the stock price has been climbing like it has been over the last few months, it's been on just a consistent straight line climb up and to the right. So I haven't looked in the last couple hours, but last I saw it was under $50 per share.
And this,
60, excuse me. Yeah.
And it would seem like if we are following the pattern leading up to the 2014 television negotiations, and certainly when the negotiations were going on for the big 2018 deals, at least when they were announced, like that was where we saw the big climbs in the stock, was the lead up to those announcements. And certainly you are getting nothing but confidence out of Nick Khan that they are expecting, sizable growth for the next set of negotiations once these deals come up in 2024.
Yeah. And we saw hype about the Hulu rights, which
that's right.
Just as we were about to start our call, I was trying to Google what this acronym he used to refer to the next day Hulu rights, RIA. It's beyond me what that stands for, but we know what he's talking about. He's talking about the next day rights to Raw and SmackDown, and I guess NXT and Main Event are probably in there too. But that deal is coming to an end soon. That's something that we knew about beforehand. They're hyping that there's immense interest in this. It makes the most sense to me for Peacock, for NBCU to have this and to close the window. They are already getting the rights to all the Raw and SmackDown episodes 30 days after the fact. So they have to wait 30 days right now to put all the Raw and SmackDown episodes on Peacock. But having the next day rights would make Peacock your center for catching up on WWE if you didn't see it live. So that makes a lot of sense for them. Hulu is this conglomerate that I think I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but Nick Khan kind of summarized it. Hulu was originally a streaming service started by, I think, the collection of NBCU and Disney and Fox. Fox is completely out of it now. And I think, is it Disney that's going to end up owning most of it, or that
was Khan's crystal ball that yes, Disney would be buying out NBC's outstanding share at the valuation several years from now. So it looks like it's more of a long-term outlook of where that's what Hulu's going to end up with, a sole ownership of Disney. Yeah.
Which is sort of confusing on a wider basis, right? Like Disney obviously has Disney Plus, which is this huge deal and is very successful, right? But, and NBCU has its own separate thing in Peacock. So what's the usefulness of Hulu? I don't know. But anyway, they're hyping that negotiation, and they probably will get an increase in that. And that'll proceed, whatever happens in the real WrestleMania in 2023, maybe in the spring of 2023 when new deals get done. That's probably going to be the timing for AEW too, roughly. What I've been wondering about lately when it comes to the TV rights fees, though, is that I wonder if we're going to see sort of an evolution in the complexity of these rights, which is kind of what we already saw in the most recent round, where they went from NBCU owning both Raw and SmackDown rights to Nick Khan came in before he worked for WWE, came in as a person working for CAA to help WWE. And he said, no, let's split the rights and sell Raw to NBCU and let's shop around SmackDown. They ended up, of course, selling it to Fox. I wonder if it gets more complex in the next round, where maybe there's live traditional TV rights sold to one or multiple parties, and then maybe there's live digital rights of some kind sold. I don't know if it's too early to think about that, whether that's something that would really happen or not. But that's something I'm trying to keep in mind. Maybe that's going to happen.
Or I would say at the very least that kind of seemed to be the pattern of the recent NFL rights and all of those renewals of, a pretty sizable digital component attached to, like, obviously the NFL has an edict of wanting to be on broadcast television, but all of these networks having their own subscription services wanting a sizable amount there as well. Yeah. Like and given the timing, where an ESPN Plus is going to be 2 to 3 years from now, as opposed to today, how aggressive Amazon gets, like it behooves WWE that you have, these options that are out there, that who is going to spend just ridiculous sums for that kind of programming that's going to become a signature for your service.
Yeah. And it's a far broader conversation, but it seems to me like there's always going to be this older portion of the population that's always going to have traditional cable and probably isn't going to change their habits. So I think there's always going to be something of a market for traditional cable and satellite, but obviously we have an ever growing younger population that's, more apt to cut the cord. And the other thing that wasn't really touched on here, but they've hyped in previous calls about how Apple and Amazon might be players for sports rights. And at the moment, I'm becoming more skeptical that that's really going to happen. We know that Amazon owns Thursday night NFL rights, but if I'm not mistaken, they haven't really made any real play for any other U.S. sports rights. I have a great deal of trouble seeing Apple, the brand Apple, the luxury brand, having something to do with wrestling. And I don't know, the speculation is that the FANGs, these 5 big tech companies, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, would, if they get into sports rights, well, look out, because that'll explode the price of everybody, because they're the richest companies in the world. Is that going to happen though? I'm less convinced today than I was a few months ago, especially considering, we didn't get any hype about that I recall on the earnings call to reinforce that.
Obviously, a big focus of this earnings report and call was live events, which was, I won't say crippling division of the company, but it was one that it looked very bleak quarter after quarter pre-pandemic, but that was a big turnaround with the return of live fans over this quarter. And this ties into, their ongoing pay-per-view strategy of really making these, instead of just having your kind of by the numbers monthly pay-per-view, trying to put a lot more stock into big events, and that meaning stadiums, and this area of their business performing very well this quarter in their first quarter back.
Yes. An average North American attendance of 8,300, which I have a spreadsheet somewhere that goes back to 2010. And this includes WrestleMania quarters too, where they've broken WrestleMania out and not broken WrestleMania out for all those WrestleMania quarters. And this is like a WrestleMania quarter, I think even higher than any WrestleMania quarter for going back to 2010. So we might have to go really, really far back to find an average attendance that's this high. So WWE definitely benefited from pent-up demand. Now remember, this has got the SummerSlam event in it that has about 45,000 paid attendees, maybe a little bit less than that.
But not one person from Tennessee, Brandon.
Yeah.
That was a surprising stat that they brought up where, for those that didn't hear the call, when explaining SummerSlam going to Nissan Stadium in Nashville this July, was that through their research, that of the tickets that sold for SummerSlam, not one ticket was purchased from the state of Tennessee, with Nick Khan's belief that these are Las Vegas and Nashville are similar markets with very little crossover. And I guess the thinking that if Tennessee or Nashville specifically will not venture out, then we will venture in and bring a lot of tourism with it. But I found that to be a fascinating
statistic. That's what he was saying.
That's what I took it.
Yeah, that sounds right. Okay. Interesting. But yeah, they did very well here. And the average in their 4 international events, which were all UK events, 7,400, the average ticket price was $75 in North America. Was that correct? Yeah, $75 in North America. I think it was $81 for the UK events. And that's way higher than anything outside of a WrestleMania quarter. WrestleMania gets really skewed. And I think there are some quarters that have measured in at the $80 average ticket price, maybe even $90. But for a non-WrestleMania quarter, this is enormous. I think it's going to be much more normal in Q4. The trends that we're seeing through WrestleTix for what the ticket counts are for Q4 at this point are going to be much more calm. They did really well with SummerSlam. That's a part of this average and this total. And those early events in July and the first events back on the road did really well too. Houston selling out with 13 or 14,000. So yeah, they did really well. But I expect a more normal pre-pandemic like Q4 where maybe the live event division doesn't report positive operating income again.
How would you assess from your vantage point just the strategy that they have gone with, where it's not the old house show touring model of old, where it's every weekend, it's the 4 events that you get in and then you get your couple of days off and then it's back on the wheel again. It's select weekends, it's generally super shows and overseas tours, and certainly a dramatic decrease in the amount of dates, even with their touring schedule as it currently exists.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that a lot, about in terms of what is the touring schedule like now versus what it was pre-pandemic. I think they'd even slowed down, if I recall, in Q1 2020.
It was, yeah. They were like, you were certainly seeing the odd like weekend off that it was, they were scaling back. And I to your point about the performance of that sector, it seemed like let's eliminate the shows that are going to skew low and are just going to be money losers for us.
That's right. Vince at some point, one of the quarters just before the pandemic, promised they were going to reimagine the live events division.
Yeah, now live events are the aspect that brings the brand alive, I think was the wording.
Yes. Well, you have to have live fans there. Otherwise, it's not quite pro wrestling in the same way. But yeah, I think it makes less and less sense to run house shows, especially when you're a media business, as they remind us. They are a media business. They're a business about selling video, whether that's live video or some other form. So why would you be putting on all of these shows that have no video use, no media use? If that quarter or if that division continues to not make a profit in quarters to come, I really, and I was questioning this, a couple of years ago. Why continue to do these house shows? I can see the value that they would have in terms of they're kind of a marketing tool, putting smiles on people's faces that lasts a lifetime, even if you're losing a little bit of money on it. And it creates a relationship with fans maybe, and promotes the product in a given town. But I don't know, in a business that has been turned upside down over the decades, from being a live event business to being a media business, it just makes less and less sense. And when you see a company that was redrawn from scratch in AEW, they've run like 2 house shows ever, and that seems to be the cost-effective thing to do.
On the subject of AEW, was it at all surprising to you that it was not a topic broached? Because this past quarter was, I would say, a significant one for that company and what they were able to do in the month of September. And often, if I have my analysts right, it's usually like Brandon Ross that'll kind of stir the pot when it comes to AEW questions. But those letters were never uttered on this call at all. Yeah, no, that's true. I did see there was Alan Gould. Which one does he write for? Which firm is he with? One of the analysts wrote a report that I did see where there was quite a bit of engagement on AEW, which was surprising to me. So the analysts are aware of AEW. At least most of them are well enough aware of what AEW is and what they're doing, what their comparisons are, especially in 18 to 49. But I guess there was a question last time, and I feel like, well, maybe it's kind of been explored, and you know what their answer is going to be. They're just going to say, everything is our competition, including sleep. We're focused on ourselves. It's kind of been litigated for now until there's more to talk about, maybe. Yes, we also had the return of Laura Needham on this call. I know a personal favorite of yours. Laura Martin, Vince. Laura Martin from Needham. I do that all the time. Yes. Yeah. Laura Martin. I forget what she wanted to know about. Yeah. Yeah, I think she had a question for Stephanie in there. They had the announcement they're increasing their guidance for the rest of this year, upping it to a range of 305 to 315 million. This seems directly correlated to the fact that they got in the Saudi Arabia event this quarter, and the fact that there are now 2 outstanding Saudi Arabia shows that I guess are going to be tacked on at time to be determined. But is that largely what you read as the reasoning for this?
Yeah, that sounds right. And so we'll have this maybe this becomes not just a 10-year deal that goes through 2027, but maybe it goes through 2028 for an additional 2 events. Those are $50 million in revenue per year, probably with a pretty high margin. This most recent one would seem to be at a smaller venue, so maybe they spent a little bit less on it even. But yeah, and another thing to think about in terms of how profitable WWE is, this return to touring, it's a little bit less expensive for them to be on the road than it is to be in the Thunderdome. I was talking with Chris Gullo last night. He was, surprised by this. And the Thunderdome was really expensive.
Yeah.
The Thunderdome is obviously more expensive than being at the PC, where they saved a ton of money early on in the pandemic. But this touring format that they have now, where they're running on Monday and Friday, it is more expensive than when they were running on Monday and Tuesday, when SmackDown was on Tuesday. But they're saving money by being back on the road now, and they're obviously at a benefit in terms of TV ratings for having fans in attendance again.
Yeah, it is interesting to look at that comparison that the UFC has been able to get away with, where if you are following, like, their fight night specials are all in their own facility of the Apex. It's a minimal crowd, so expenses are low and pretty much fixed. It's not big fight. It's, find a main event that is suitable for television and round out the card, bulk up your pay-per-views with your biggest cards, and their television viewership has not been affected. They do very well on ESPN, on ESPN Plus. And that, to me, was, if WWE could have pulled that off with those PC shows, the expenses would have been enormous over the course of the pandemic. And with UFC, it's kind of hard to just justify going back on the road when things are working in this format.
Yeah, it's surprising to me when I started to learn about it, how expensive it is to put these shows on. Mm-hmm. Especially if you watch some old wrestling, where it's like there's a curtain and a ring and some lights, maybe not some especially bright ones even. But there, a wrestling event, I think a Raw or a SmackDown costs them nearly $1 million to produce. I think maybe AEW spends a little bit less, but it's many hundreds of thousands of dollars. And anytime you can avoid having an extra load in and load out, you save a lot of money in doing that. And that's why we see AEW do so many of these, Rampage tapings in tandem with a pay-per-view or with Dynamite. It saves them a lot of money not having to load in and load out. It's why WrestleMania, making WrestleMania 2 days, is not that big of a risk. It's just holding all that stuff there for an extra day. It's not picking all that up and traveling to another stadium. So yeah, they're saving a lot of money this way.
In just kind of an overall sense, and this can kind of tie into the cuts as well, is that you sit down and go through these reports and you listen to this call, and it's almost like 2 different businesses when you look at the differences. That this is an industry where the talent, they were largely brought up on a generation of house show payoffs, traditional pay-per-view payoffs when that was a thing, discretionary payoffs. And the business side has moved into all of this fixed income, streaming deals, television deals that talent gets no cut of. We have no evidence that things like this NFT deal, there's any trickle down for the talent. There may not, but we don't have any transparency on that. That there's just all these new revenue streams that are being created. And the question I always get back to is that it just feels like this is an era where talent is at almost their least influence when it comes to the overall business management of the company. And on top of that, you have undeniable anxiety that has to come with cuts that could occur at any point of the year and have happened time after time, that your job security isn't even what it once was a few years ago, when cuts were pretty few and far between. And I I always just look at, is there ever kind of that breaking point? But I don't hold my breath for that. It just seems like this is so baked in that talent is just not going to want to rock the boat, regardless of all this revenue that's created, and makes WWE a very attractive company when you don't have a players association or union to have to negotiate any of this revenue with.
Yeah, especially when you see people of the status of Braun Strowman and Bray Wyatt get cut. It feels like no one is safe. Or Nia Jax is suddenly cut, and maybe Keith Lee. But yeah, I don't think wrestlers are going to unionize. There's too much competition among wrestlers for, I think, everybody to stand together. We saw Zelina Vega, tweet something, and then a few months later, right, she's back with WWE. I think wrestlers are also in kind of their best situation in many years, in terms of there's two active wrestling companies who are doing pretty well and can pay wrestlers very well in WWE and AEW, maybe to some extent New Japan. So there's more competition. And I like I said earlier, though, I think WWE's part of their strategy is to mitigate that and to say, we're not going to participate in that, or we're going to participate in it as little as we have to, and just have we're not wrestling. We build people from scratch, so they don't have to compete with that. But yeah, it's, wrestlers, they want to be in, a lot of people want to be in WWE and have their childhood dream of wrestling for this company and performing for the company. So, I think people are willing to give up a lot for that, especially if they're going to be paid fairly well, or at least there's the opportunity to make millions of dollars.
We also got an update, Brandon, on the soon to be released Vince McMahon documentary series on Netflix that are out of this world. Wait until you see it, courtesy of the Podfather, Bill Simmons.
Yes. Nick Khan says he's seen the cuts. He can't wait for you to see it. This may be the first Vince-centric production produced in cooperation with WWE that I think we've ever seen. Well, I guess there was a DVD years ago. But yeah, I'm still waiting for the developments on the scripted series, Vince versus the United States. Yeah, it's supposed to be a multi-part Netflix documentary, right? I'm sure I will eat it up. It's WWE doesn't have a very good track record of being honest and introspective when it comes to their own history. So maybe this is a little bit independent, though. It doesn't sound like they're totally in control of it. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much of it is revisionist history.
Let's chat a bit about Kristina Salen, who was on this call in her usual role, gave her presentation. And then this morning, we get the press release that she is on her way out just over a year after being installed into that position. And it will be Frank Riddick III stepping in. He had been the interim CFO after the abrupt dismissal of George Barrios and Michelle Wilson. He's been a longtime board member. And based on the press release, this does not sound like a temporary position Frank Riddick is filling. It looks like he is the guy to succeed Kristina Salen. But this was certainly gave you whiplash if you were on that call last night and then getting this news this morning.
Yes, I was just, not long after I'd woken up, I checked my email and I got an alert from World Wrestling Entertainment. And Kristina Salen is out and Frank Riddick is in. As you mentioned, he was previously the interim CFO. And then I tweeted what I tweeted, that she's out and he's in. And I guess I assumed that Frank Riddick is going to be this interim CFO again until they find somebody else. Minutes later, somebody texts me and says that, nope, he's full time. So at least that's what they're communicating.
This is obviously somebody that, like, we know very little about Frank Riddick, but seems to be almost in that same level that like a Basil DeVito was, that you can plug him into any hole. And there's obviously a confidence that they have in him to perform whatever it is, a multitude of tasks for the company.
Somebody mentioned to me that he's a Vince guy, that he and Vince get along well. He's got a lot of hard consonants in his name. I could see Vince liking that too.
Probably has some sketches of them in his office, a la Jerry McDivitt, I'm sure.
Yes. But yeah, no, Kristina Salen joined WWE at really the same time that Nick Khan did in the summer of 2020. She's been CFO previously for Moda Operandi and Etsy. Don't ask me to tell you what Moda Operandi is. But she's been a CFO in and she was a CFO for another company called United Masters, I think. Anyway, right. she was at each of those companies, United Masters and Moda Operandi, for about a year and a few months. And now it's been about a year and a few months since she's out of this company. Several months back, I was told that, she wasn't well liked. I didn't really get a lot of details, but I didn't think that much of it. And then even before yesterday's call, somebody was telling me, oh yeah, there's a lot of people leaving WWE. I guess they don't, she's causing a lot of turnover in the finance department. And I looked at the timeline. I was like, oh, it's about a year and a few months. Maybe she's not long for this job. And then sure enough, this morning, she's gone. I imagine this was not a decision that was made this morning, but I imagine this is just my speculation. It's not information that I know, but I imagine there was, an understanding that we'll do this through the earnings call and then we're going to let you go or something. But, yeah, it seems like a lot of people had a lot of problems with her. So, yeah.
So the Kristina Salen era comes to an end. I don't know if it is going to be remembered all that much. It was not the longest tenure in this position, but yeah, certainly. I mean, it was kind of, that was your 1-2 punch when they were introduced last summer with Nick Khan. So I guess we'll get to hear Frank Riddick a bit on these calls, presumably.
We will hear him again. Yeah. He's been on the conference calls in his interim time too, but whenever major executives come to this company, or any company probably, they always make certain hires, and you can kind of look at their LinkedIn profile and be like, oh yeah, they worked with this person in these other previous jobs. And we have Karen Mullane, who was hired shortly after Kristina Salen came there. She was the chief accounting officer. Her name is at the signed at the bottom of a lot of these SEC documents. So it's a question about whether she will continue to be with this company. I don't know. I've asked. Nobody knows who I've talked to. And the general counsel, Samira Shah, is also a former colleague of Kristina Salen. So these seem like major Kristina Salen hires. These were hires that were, they issued press releases about them at the time. So we'll see if these aren't going to be major stories, but maybe something that people in the wrestling media will report on soon.
Was there anything else coming out of any of the multitude of announcements that Nick Khan had that stuck out to you as major, or something to kind of park in the back of your mind for future discussion to plant that seed?
Nothing too major. What I was surprised by in my trying to do estimates of what this company is going to report. The Peacock deal is now well underway. This was the second full quarter under the Peacock deal. And I looked back at the second, what they reported in the network line for the second quarter, and it was $61.5 million. Okay. Well over what they were reporting in the direct to consumer era of the network, where they were reporting in the $40 million range. So I figured, all right, they reported, this is a whole quarter, Q2, where they had the Peacock deal. So it'll probably be around $60 million again. They reported $43 million. Mm-hmm. Something more along the lines of what they were reporting when the network was just a standalone service. And then Kristina Salen said something in the Q&A that made it sound like, because I think somebody asked a question that was approximately about this. And she said that they allocate revenue based on the pay-per-view events that happen in that quarter. So WrestleMania, so what it sounds like, but she clarified that Peacock, NBCU, is paying them the same amount throughout the year. But when there's a WrestleMania, they're going to allocate a lot more revenue in the WrestleMania quarter. SummerSlam, they'll allocate maybe the third most or the second most. So it sounds like they're getting paid a fixed amount that's probably escalating over time, but a fixed amount by NBC Universal for the network rights on Peacock, but that they decide how much revenue to recognize in the quarter based on the prominence of the pay-per-view, which was a surprise to me. But apparently that's a thing that one can do in accounting.
I guess they look at the Extreme Rules quarter, and it's yes. I guess it's not going to quite measure up, even with a blockbuster like SummerSlam in there. And I mean, of note is that, given that they have put out the pay-per-view calendar for next year, scaling back somewhat, especially during the first quarter next year, instead of having your Elimination Chamber in there, it's looking like we will get that New Year's Day pay-per-view, the Rumble several weeks later, a Saudi Arabia card in the first quarter, and then it's the 2-night WrestleMania, which technically falls into the second quarter.
Yeah. WrestleMania usually falls in the second quarter. It's been in April for a number of years. But yeah, who knows? You can put Elimination Chamber on it anywhere you want. Elimination Chamber was on the New Year's Revolution card years ago, right?
That is right.
But yeah, it's with any Saudi event, though, they'll have a good $50 million to put in that other category, or excuse me, the large scale international event.
Yes, it's amazing how much they cling to that term. I mean, you will never hear the term Saudi Arabia on these calls, and I mean, it does open up the natural question of, once there is more opening in the world for more touring, of where they explore other places, other governments that would be willing to spend anywhere close to that for WWE shows. I think that they would be certainly making themselves available if we're talking upwards of $45 to $50 million per show. Are there other areas of the world that would be exploring that kind of thing, that would have that level of interest in a WWE product?
I feel like this is an anomaly, like this situation with Saudi Arabia. Like, you've got a country that has a lot of money, presumably because of their oil business in Saudi Aramco, but and I think their motivation is PR in terms of let's get an event that makes our country look good, and we've got a lot of reasons why people criticize our country. I don't know if there's another country in the world that's like that much of a pariah in the international community and has the money. I don't know, but it was maybe we'll get another North Korea whatever that was called, World Wrestling Festival.
That's right. WWE's Collision in Korea. Coming to you. Another 2-day event that will be a future Dark Side of the Ring episode. Mm-hmm. But that was the third quarter earnings call, and I would be remiss, Brandon, not to just get some of your just overall thoughts on just this latest round of cuts. Do you expect this as just sort of, this is going to be business as usual, that we should not just look at these as one year where it was extreme balancing of the numbers? Do you expect this to be a semi-regular thing, or are you looking at this kind of condensed to, they get to a certain number and then they ease off these enormous cuts every couple of months?
Well, it's got to normalize eventually, right? I think what's driving this is a few things. Like I said, I think they overstocked themselves on wrestling talent for competition reasons. Then they changed their talent philosophy, at least as it was administered, then started paying attention to what was happening in developmental finally, or became unsatisfied enough over enough time with what he was being served in the main roster call-ups to say, well, I don't want any more short guys and indie guys in their 30s. And they've decided that they want to do more athletes and people that they train in the performance center. So I think once they get down to a certain number, I think it's got to normalize. Or once they sort of, get through the turnover and get through the rotation of having the kind of talent that they want, I would imagine that it will normalize. Well, will Vince still be around at that point? I don't know. But yeah, and I think part of it too is new management. I think what we've seen, not just in terms of wrestling talent, but in terms of their employee structure, we've seen a lot of cost cutting, a lot of restructuring of departments, merging of departments, and I think that's a new CFO and a new chief revenue officer / president coming in and saying, all right, this is what we've inherited. How can we make this more efficient? And often that means, unfortunately, laying people off.
If there is a quote of the entire call, I always like to pick out the most noteworthy quote, Brandon. I think we have to go once again to Nick Khan explaining the streaming space and noting great success means great profits. Mediocre success still means profit.
Yeah, I didn't catch that. That's very
a great line.
That's very applicable. Was that like
that was during the Q&A when Eric Handler had a question.
This was when partners, yes.
Yes, and Nick Khan dropped that one. I was like, what a line that can be used in many different contexts when describing WWE. Great success means great profits. Mediocre success still means profit. Yeah,
I think that's very applicable to WWE. I think they've put out a product that has frustrated a large portion of their fan base for many years. This is I think one of the necessary conditions for AEW to even exist. And and they're sort of Vince is sort of in denial that he's in the wrestling business and wants to sort of rebrand what they're all about and has for decades. But, they want to be something else, and they're doubling down on this different talent strategy. And I think eventually that catches up with them. It kind of already is in terms of there's a competitor now that has some viability. But it really emphasizes how you can do sort of a mediocre job in your content creatively, but you're so benefited by the environment that you're in, that is the media economy that you are fortunate to find yourself in, that you can break financial records and everything seems to be A-okay. Best ever, in fact.
It's going to be another incredible year for the company, and one where I think it'll be very interesting at the end of the year how we look back at just the state of the industry as a whole. That you have a thriving WWE, a very legitimate competitor that has cultivated itself in AEW, but we have also seen like the other side, that we have seen an NXT system completely flipped over and has changed their recruitment strategy greatly. And it has led to jobs being eliminated. We have seen Ring of Honor going through a tremendous turmoil as we speak, and what the landscape ultimately is for different performers. Like, is this overall a net positive with the emergence of an AEW at the expense of other entities when it comes to just recruitment, jobs in the industry? I think it's still a very hard year to forecast in 2022, where, like, does a New Japan open up as it had pre-pandemic? Are there going to be the same amount of options for talent that kind of the door closes with WWE? Not everybody can end up in an AEW. And is there the demand to meet the supply of talent that it's just an enormous amount that you have to choose from if you're a promoter? It's just, can your business sustain with all of these numbers that are out there? Not everybody is going to end up with contracts at the end of the day.
Yeah, there's a lot of talent out there, and a lot of talent because of, I think, WWE's over shopping of talent that have gotten a lot of exposure in the last few years. And certainly, now we're seeing a lot of that talent get set free. And I really think, sort of fantasy booking on Wrestlenomics Radio, the last episode, there's a great opportunity for Paul Levesque if he wanted to leave WWE. And if there was, I think there's an opportunity for another wrestling brand that is really ambitious and has many of the skills and assets that Tony Khan has in terms of the connections in the media industry to get a valuable media deal.
And wrestling smarts. Like, I think we've often kind of overlooked that. And I think AEW is showing, like, yes, you need financial muscle. You need certainly entertainment, television connections, but you also need wrestling smarts. And God, 6 months ago, I probably would have scoffed at the Paul Levesque option. I still think it's a long shot, but I don't think it's as absurd an idea as it would have been at what point. Like, this is, you can just see the public plays that are here, and it's like a very clear rejection of that system that he had cultivated.
Yeah. You guys are watching Succession, right? I think he's got to make the Kendall move and turn on his dad.
Oh man, I didn't even think of him in the Kendall role. You're right.
Yeah, he is kind of a Tom Wambsgans though. But no, I think there's just with the media economy being what it is, media rights being so valuable, I think there's space for another wrestling competitor. And we've seen Ring of Honor didn't have all that it took, or even the desire to be that extra player. I don't think Impact is going to be it. I don't know that New Japan has the vision and the personnel and the understanding of the market to make it happen. But if there was somebody who's got some of those assets and those skills already there, and if they wanted to team up with somebody who does have strong wrestling knowledge, I don't know, Paul Levesque would be one of them. Maybe he seemed to do. We talk about wrestling booms, and NXT wasn't a wrestling boom, but on a certain level, it was. It was this explosion of a brand that went from nothing, from this thing that came out of FCW to being this thing that suddenly was able to, in tandem with the WWE main roster events, sell out arenas. And that was a remarkable phenomenon. And he's somebody who led that endeavor and made a lot of relationships with a lot of talent and other personnel. So there's that. I think there's another opportunity for somebody if all the right pieces were together.
Well, you've just mapped out the ultimate palace intrigue of where this could all go. I mean, God, you get that closing moment of Nitro where the name on the Fox renewal contract says McMahon, Shane McMahon.
That's right. Yes.
Well, Brandon, it's always great to sit down and just pick your brain over all of these very intriguing topics. And this all leads into Sunday night where Wrestlenomics Radio makes its post-wrestling debut. And you have no shortage of a discussion with yourself and Chris. I'm very much looking forward to you kind of breaking down all of this that we've been talking about, and who knows what'll happen in the next 48 hours. Yeah,
we're going to have to get some audio clips ready, some excerpts from the call. We'll have some audio to sprinkle in there. We're probably going to do a little bit of Wrestlenomics 101 as Way has suggested. We should do a little bit of a primer to explain to people, I think, why Wrestlenomics matters, why it's an interesting topic for a lot of people, and and just sort of what we're all about. So that'll be a very interesting one that people should check out this weekend.
Yeah, we haven't gone over the re-airing rights yet of Wrestlenomics, but those discussions intense and fun.
Yes,
as Nick Khan would put it.
We'll put out another landmark announcement soon in the future.
That's right. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Again, follow all of Brandon Thurston's great work when it comes to all of this subject matter. And then Sunday night, it will be live at postwrestling.com, the launch of Wrestlenomics Radio, the post-brand edition of Wrestlenomics Radio. So that is it for us. Catch Way and Kate from Montreal tonight on Rewind to SmackDown. They will be live at 11:15 Eastern for all patrons. And that is it. Goodbye.